Well, I woke up this morning from a reoccurring dream.
Hello people, I'm Jaby KOAY, joined by SOFIA. We're looking at the Armchair Historians, How Did Britain Conquer India? Animated History. This is a topic that is not fun, but we're gonna learn. We're gonna learn about it together. This has 34,000 upvotes, 2.4 thousand downvotes. I'm hoping that this is historically accurate. Nonetheless, it has mostly upvotes, so I'm excited to learn more and more. If you guys haven't already, you can subscribe to the Armchair Historian. There's a link in the description below. You can click on that, find the original video, give it an upvote, let them know Jaby sent you. Also subscribe here, hit that bell icon, all notifications, and vote this video up to let YouTube know you're enjoying what you're watching. Last but not least, SOFIA has an Instagram account. She's just anxiously waiting there for you, phone in hand, except for when she's shooting with me, for you to subscribe to her.
I am.
Follow
Go
her.
do it now.
All right, here we go.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. Today's episode, how the British Empire was able to assert control over India.
Prime and low. Fire.
The Indian subcontinent was subjugated by an island more than 20 times smaller in size. This unimaginable conquest of what would become the jewel in the British crown greatly empowered the British Empire. By the middle of the 19th century, British rule led to a new wave of South Asian nationalist movements, the effects to which are still felt to this day. But we're not going to be delving into too much detail about the consequences of British rule. Rather, our goal is to evaluate what actions taken by the British and Indians alike paved the way for British rule in the first place. In order to understand how the British were able to take control of India, we need to go back to New Year's Eve on 1600, well into the reign of Elizabeth I. It was her signature on a royal charter granted to a group of adventurer merchants, later known as the East India Company, that would change the destinies of two nations forever. However, At the time, the company's leaders were not yet interested in trading directly with the reigning Indian power of the time. Instead, they focused on competing with the Dutch, French, and Portuguese in the East Indies. But over time, the East India Company, after being driven out of the East Indies, shifted its focus onto the Indian subcontinent. In 1640, a company representative succeeded in securing a grant of land in southern India, a pivotal moment, as it marked the first time that Indian land was owned directly by the English. It was on this land that they constructed Fort St. George. The settlement that grew around this region became the thriving city of Madras, now known as Chennai, and home to over 7 million people. As more and more company-owned forts and
I know, when you're trying so hard all the time to be respectful, and then of course you mess it up. And so he added a cute animation in there saying sorry for my mispronunciation. That was cute.
forts and settlements sprang up all over the Indian subcontinent, the English became a leading exporter of spices, which, in the words of Brian Gardner, author of the East India Company, had a considerable place in life. Men were prepared to die in search of them, and many did. No gift was more acceptable, and to be well supplied was a mark of status. Wealth could be measured in spices. The French, Danish, and Dutch all became similarly active in Indian affairs from the 17th century onwards, with the Portuguese already established in the region. Joining me now is our good friend History with Hilbert, who will be providing us with some background information on the Mughal Empire.
As the 18th century commenced, the Europeans became increasingly involved in Indian affairs. They could afford to, because the Mughal Empire, which once ruled over not just the majority of India, but also parts of modern-day Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, was on the decline in the wake of very costly wars of conquest. The Mughals suffered from repeated invasions by Persians, Afghans, and other Indians. In 1739, the Mughal capital, Delhi, was sacked by the Persian ruler Nader Shah, following the decisive Battle of Kurnool, and in 1748, Nader Shah's protege, the Afghan Ahmed Shah Durrani, also led his armies into Mughal territory, beginning his own invasion. Due to these factors, by the middle of the 18th century, the Mughal emperor took the role of a figurehead to many new empowered local rulers. If you'd like to check out my video that goes into more detail about the Mughals, then follow the link in the description below.
Thanks for joining us again, Hilbert. As the Mughals weakened, the Maratha Kingdom in the central west of India was carving out an empire of its own. Despite never eclipsing the Mughal Empire at its height, the Maratha Empire remained as a dominant power in India for another 80 years or so. As all of this was happening, the East India Company began to overshadow its European competitors, devoting substantial profits to raising a private army in an effort to contend with the Maratha Empire and Bengal. By now, the East India Company benefited greatly from the country's imposing navy, which enabled it to ferry more and more men to India than its European competitors. As much as the company's military aided in its growth, it was the laissez-faire policy that won over many local rulers to their side, many of whom benefited financially from their dealings with the company and did not perceive their sovereignty to be at risk. Of all the Europeans who had established themselves in India, the British and French based in the south were now preeminent. But under the daring Robert Clive, the British East India Company's army was able to defeat both the Bengalese and their French allies at the Battle of Plassey during the 7 Years' War, which, by the 1760s, allowed them to assert control over much of the Indian subcontinent unchecked through direct territorial possession or indirect tributary arrangements. To quote Gardner once more, by the Treaty of Paris 1763, the French forts taken by the company were returned to them, some of them having been razed to the ground. But the French never recovered, and only 6 years later, the French East India Company collapsed, although the stations remained in the possession of France. During the British advance into the Indian heartland, it encountered staunch resistance from the Sikh Empire and other Indian states not interested in doing business with the English. The Duke of Wellington, who would later go on to defeat Napoleon, won several victories against these states while aiding his brother Richard Wellesley, who acted as Governor General of India. Consequently, by the turn of the 19th century, the Wellesley brothers had succeeded in leaving behind them the foundations of an empire greater even that of Akbar himself.
Admiral, we have enemy ships in Sector 47. It's a trap.
As the middle of the 19th century drew closer, an Indian national consciousness began to take form, as company rule resulted in a wider array of social and economic reforms being demanded from increasingly alienated local rulers. These sentiments culminated in the Indian Rebellion of 1857, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny, which was brutally suppressed and concluded with the formal dissolution of the Mughal Empire and the transfer of power from the British East India Company to Britain itself. Power now rested in the hands of the British Crown directly, and as the 19th century continued, India's resources and the livelihoods of its people were exploited to fuel the Industrial Revolution in Britain, leading to a series of famines which shook the Indian economy to the core and left millions of Indians dead. One thing was certain: the British Empire now had millions of new subjects under its rule in India, and imperial expansion wouldn't stop there. To conclude, the political vacuum left by the Mughal Empire in the wake of repeated invasions, the failure of other Indian states, particularly the Maratha Empire, to fill that vacuum and unify India, the failure of other European powers to stop the British, Britain's military and industrial superiority, and the governing policy of the East India Company allowed Britain to take over the Indian subcontinent.
I thought he was going to talk about, I guess, more of behavior of Indians or the military power or lack thereof of Indians versus the Brits who came in. It seemed to talk more about just sort of
how they got
step by step, like what you know.
This is the process. This is how they got there.
Yeah, order of operations, what they did. I'm like, oh, but how?
But how did the Indians feel? Like, how did they react?
Maybe if I watch it again, I'll get more out of this in terms of detail and whatnot that I feel like I'm perhaps missing. But nonetheless, the amount of damage done by the Brits is unquestionable. I looked up the number some weeks back about how many Indians died as a result of what the British did, and it was some absurd number, like in the billions. 1.8
What?
billion. Yeah. 1.8 billion. This armchair historian guy is taking a very, very difficult topic. He's breaking it down as matter-of-factly as he can. You know, I appreciate getting educated. It's cool that we have resources like this on YouTube that we can turn to understand things from history better. The only thing I would suggest as one YouTuber to another is to maybe slow it down a little bit and maybe dive into more details, because it seemed like it was concentrated, particularly when he brought in the guest, a YouTuber whose name I forgot. It seemed like it was trying to move quickly, like line overlapping line. It's fine for like discussions like this, but when you're talking about history and specific specific details, especially for someone like myself who doesn't know this stuff very well. I appreciate it when you sort of like let it soak in for a moment and punctuate certain details so I can like really hold on to that.
Yeah.
Because the most poignant thing in here for me was like the rebellion, the 7-Year War and the rebellion and what happened there and how the French basically could not recover in the area that they had. I wonder how much of India would be speaking English if the Brits never showed up. And another weird thing I like to mention sometimes is that with consideration to the butterfly effect, if the Brits never conquered India, a lot of people watching this right now wouldn't exist because it just changes everything, right?
Yeah.
Like if your parents decided to make a baby on the next evening instead of the evening that they made you, wouldn't be you. You'd be a completely different person.
Yeah, so it's unfortunate that it happened, but that's how the people that are from India are here.
We're here now.
We're here now.
Matters. Yeah.
It's important to know these things so that history doesn't repeat itself.
Exactly.
And I think here it's a shame to say that in the United States, I think people completely disregard history sometimes, especially if it's not our own. It's like, I did not know enough about this.
Yeah.
So that's shame on me. But really good to see or to watch educational videos like that because...
No, totally. It's upsetting stuff. I feel like this topic, he's trying to give you an overview of what happened over the course of 200, 300 years, right? From 1600 to 1900 or so. That's a large time span to cover in 9 minutes. That's not even 9 minutes because he had his introduction and his thank you to Patreon and the credits and everything. And so really it was like 8 minutes, 8 minutes and 15 seconds or something like that. I'm like, there's a lot of ground to cover in 8 minutes or so. And so I wouldn't mind seeing a follow-up video from, I know this is old, this is from all the way back in 2018, but I wouldn't mind seeing a follow-up video from Armchair Historian that like dives deeper into the more minute details of like how and the personalities of like the Brits versus the Indians and the weaponry and whatnot, like what were the tactics employed.
And more on the repercussions as well.
Yeah, that too.
Because he said he wasn't going to focus on that as much, which I mean, fair enough, he did say that.
Interesting stuff nonetheless, you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Do let us know your feelings in the comments below. Follow Carolina Sofia on the social media. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that bell icon, all notifications, and vote this up to let YouTube know you're enjoying what you're watching. I'm Jaby KOAY. This is
Carolina Sofia.
Peace out.